And welcome back. And one of my guests that we bring on periodically to give some light on many different, especially Jewish issues, is Barry Chamish. Barry, of course, lived in Israel. So much of his family are still there. Barry, originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba, an Israeli citizen, fought in 1982 with the IDF. Has really extensive journalistic experience inside the state and has written about things, to be honest with you, you're one of the most bold Jewish journalists in history, and you've had a few colleagues that have helped to inspire you, Barry. But I'd like to read your articles, and because truth-telling is really important, and you mentioned an interesting comment before the show today that about snakes and skin. Can you use that metaphor? Because I love that.
It's an analogy. It's I think I got it from National Geographic. Right. In the Far East, they say you can't face the snake until it loses its skin. In other words, you got to face the truth. You have to. And this is so blatant. And frankly, you're right. Why am I the only one writing? How come everyone's buying into a very wrong truth, a neo-history? Now, what I wrote about, who knows why, but I did something different. I used Wikipedia, which rarely I do. I used Wikipedia for two sources. One, the transfer agreement. Two, the Evian conference. That's what I wrote about. Now, look, you start with the transfer agreement. It was negotiated in 1933 by one Chaim Arlozorov, who was murdered. Lots of murders, by the way, with labor Zionism. You don't last long if you're up top. He was murdered. They blamed the right. They blamed the Irgun. They threw him out of it's called the Jewish Agency, essentially the parliament running the Jews from Jerusalem. They threw out the religious, that's the Agudah. They took over the whole. Again, you don't know what a Jewish agency is, you don't need to. In short, they took over the government of the Jews from the British. In other words, the British recognized labor Zionism as the sole rulers from that point on of the Jews of Israel. Now, what they did, the Jews of Israel, and again, these are the founders, all right? These, the Chaim Weizmann, the Ben-Gurions, the Golda Meirs, the Rabbins, the Peres. Peres is the only one who survived and still lives. In short, they founded the state. The transfer agreement was signed with the Nazis in 1933. It was very simplified anyways. The wealthy Jews, £1,000 back then must have been serious money. You had to give it to a bank. The bank transferred to Israel where you bought German goods, whether you liked it or not. That's where your £1,000 went. And they got 70,000 pioneers. They had to go through special camps in Nazi Germany. Everything else was banned for the Jews. But for the labor Zionists, they had camps to prepare them, to send them to kibbutzim, to change their lifestyles tremendously, to turn them into a really, really... Look, I'm going to say the word, and don't underestimate how much I mean it, a very sick morality, and that was labor Zionism. Yeah. The right and the religious, they didn't murder. They weren't murderers. Well, labor Zionism, boy, have they got a record of murder. And I'm talking in this article, one episode, and that's the Jews of Hungary, Romania, 800,000 slaughtered when all of them could have been saved. All of them. Right. Now, look, here is what happened. They signed in 1933. By 1937, FDR knew there was a Holocaust in the air. It was there, and I'll explain why very shortly. He organized a conference in France, in Evian-de-Maine. 32 nations showed up to save the Jews. It was opposed from Jerusalem. The labor Zionists fought Evian. They had whole committees. They sent Golda Meir there as a spy. They did everything to sabotage Evian. The Jews could have been saved. They made sure they weren't. And by the way, they knew the choice was Evian or Holocaust. They knew it. Now, I'll go into why shortly, but I want to do this first. The story is, it gives truly, I have nightmares every day over this story. In 1937, all right, the year before Evian, the Nazis sent their representative to Jewish Palestine to report on the transfer agreement on this co-enterprise. His name was Adolf Eichmann. He spent 2 months there having a whale of a time. Now, we don't have a lot of time, and I got a lot of proof, but he reported a great ideological, he had a great time on the kibbutz. And the kibbutzim probably gave him more than just ideology for his 2 months. He was thrilled with them. And we'll shortly quote him. I just want to sum this up. Now comes Evian in 38. Now comes the labor Zionists fighting it. Now, look, Evian was there to save the Jews. Labor Zionists, you'd think they would have looked forward to the possibility of Israel getting European Jews. Even if most didn't go to Israel, their lives would be saved. There wouldn't be the disgrace of the Holocaust, but they wanted their Jews and only their Jews to survive. So they sided with Hitler over FDR. That's what actually happened. Now, how they rewrote history. It's incredible. That Evian was FDR's way of preventing America from suffering culpability for the upcoming Holocaust. That's how this neo-history is writing Evian. He would gather 32 nations together in France just to make the point that we're not culpable. That's how low the history, this neo-history has sunk. It's
right. In other words, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was, in a sense, assembling this to actually act as a cover, is what you're saying.
He knew that they were going to be slaughtered. He asked to spread the Jews around. They met for a couple of weeks. It wasn't a secret. The secret was in Jerusalem, they fought it. And they fought it effectively. Now, I'll give you the quotes from my article. The Nazis would have been delighted to get rid of their Jews. Their original thought process was not slaughter. It was get these feeble-blooded Jews out of our kingdom, and they were nuts. But they weren't at the beginning mass slaughterers. They sure became that. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, later on, exactly. But we know that both William Lyon Mackenzie of Canada and the U.S. president were not opening the doors up when they saw this coming slaughter to have mass.
Please, you don't do this.
Yeah.
I get this baloney. The St. Louis came and they were turned back. Don't do this. It's not helping matters. It's another side to things.
Yeah, it's another side. But let's continue when we come back from the break, Barry. We'll talk more about Evian and about what really happened with this cover-up, because people need to know what's happening, and right now there's a lot of danger going on with international politics as well. Back in just a moment. And Barry Chamish. Barry, it's interesting to hear your storytelling history. I'll try not to interrupt. I want you to explain why it's so important to understand that this misrepresentation of history, how dangerous it is to not only the state in the past, the state of Israel and the people, the Jews, but how dangerous it is to the current state of Israel and its consequences.
I don't know if it's any more dangerous than the 40s, where they were totally wiped out of Europe. Wherever the Nazis conquered, they were wiped out. I don't think it's any more or less bad than then. It's always been awful. Labor Zionism was the worst thing that ever happened to Judaism, hands down. Right. And it's from our people. But that's a different story. Where it came from, look, you have an article by me about the attempt supposedly to free the Hungarian Jews by the labor Zionist representative. His name was Rudolf Kastner. He went to Hungary, met with Eichmann. They were pals. He put on an SS uniform. He traveled to Belzin to see the Jews being slaughtered. Eichmann offered him the lot. Just give me 700 trucks to get the loot out of here, and I'll figure out the rest. You don't have to send any more of your people. He turned him down. Kastner got about 3,000 of his buddies saved and 800,000 slaughtered.
Wow.
The orders came from Jerusalem. Now, you've got yourself, you have to remember before we go on, I just summed it up. This article of mine, well, it does more than sum it up. It provides you Wikipedia proof that, yes, there was an Evian, and yes, there was a transfer agreement, and yes, there was an Arlazarov, and everything I say is the truth. It works.
Right.
Look, one of the issues, the first president of Israel was Chaim Weizmann, and I won't go into the mythology around him, but he was asked to speak at something called the Peel Commission in 1937, and he was asked, these are the Brits asking him, do you really want 6 million Jews in Palestine? Here's what he answered, that we want to save about 2 million. The old will pass. This, they will bear their fate or they will not. These are people he's talking about. They have already become like dust, economic and moral dust in a cruel world. They were preparing to murder their own people. They were not in any desperation to save them. People just can't understand. They viewed their own people the same way the Nazis did. And it gets very, very, for me, it's a nightmare. All right?
Right.
Look, we have to look at this terrific time that Rudolf Kastner had in Hungary with Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann managed to, by the way, they're all dead. Everyone who murdered these 800,000 Hungarians, they're dead. Kastner's dead. He was murdered by the same people who murdered Arlozorov, and that's the labor Zionists. Oh, Eichmann, I assume, is dead. The only Nazi ever tried and convicted in Israel, and there were many, many tens and hundreds of thousands of legitimate people to try. But they only tried and convicted one, Adolf Eichmann. And that was, well, he was in a soundproof box and he couldn't say anything publicly, and they got him shut up finally. He wrote, this is for Life magazine, and I'm going to directly from Life. You can't get a better quote from people. By the way, the story was called Eichmann Tells His Own Damning Story. He describes Kastner. All right, quote, a fanatical Zionist. He agreed to help keep the Jews from resisting deportation and even keep order in the collection camps. If I would close my eyes and let a few hundred or a few thousand Jews emigrate to Palestine, it was a good bargain. For keeping order in the camps, the price of 15 or 20,000 Jews in the end was not too high. Not too high, because Kastner rendered me a great service by helping keep order in the deportation camps. For that, I would let his groups escape. Now, I don't know what breaks your heart, all right? But that a Jew would cut a deal like this with Eichmann. After Eichmann offered him all the Jews, all of them, for 700 trucks. He didn't want to kill him exactly. He had a great time looking at the transfer agreement kibbutz. He wasn't, he didn't hate Jews. He was ordered to murder them. He knew they were going to lose the war. He asked Kastner for a way to get out of Hungary and take his loot with him. Kastner didn't have the imagination you would think. One way or another, he turned him down, and he let 800,000 Jews get slaughtered and helped keep order in the deportation camps. Isn't that a nice story?
It's amazing, and I'm sure that even though it's the truth, there's very little among the Jewish community willing to accept it, even though you document things to the hilt, Barry.
This is something I've never understood. Look, they have to. At some point in their lives, this new history they've been given is such a bunch of BS. It can't last.
How do they get a hold of your books, by the way? I want to intro that, because I think your books are I call required reading. If you really want to know what's going on in the world, so from the Second World War on to really know what's happening in the Middle East, you need to read Barry's books. You want to know where
labor Zionism came from, and you get it from me. That's a book called Shabtai Tzvi, Labor Zionism and the Holocaust, where I cover the subject. You get all my books at www.lulu.com. That's lulu.com. There's a search box right in my last name, Chamish. Chamish. You'll get to all the books. And my website is barrychamish.com. I hope it's working, but nonetheless, all my books are at lulu.com. All righty, are we ready?
We are indeed. Let's continue. We're going to go on break here in about a minute or so, but let's continue for the next minute or two.
Well, then what we're going to do, let's say there were breakthrough books. I'm not the only one.
Right. But yours are the most current and up-to-date, and you're still writing excellent journalistic analyses to tell people the truth of what happened.
Well, let's talk about Ben Heck, who in 1962 wrote Perfidy. This was the story of the journalist. His name was Michael Greenwald. He took Rudolf Kastner.
And Barry, you're going to mention about Ben Hecht and more history. Please continue.
Look, Ben Heck was a terrific comedy film writer. He wrote The Front Page. That's, a hilarious comedy from the 30s. He was, like me, a proud Jew, and he ran into a great journalist from Hungary. His name was Michael Greenwald. He sued Rudolf Kastner for working hand-in-hand with Eichmann to murder 800,000 Hungarian Jews while saving a few hundred of his own friends. It was Ben Hecht who died on a sidewalk in Manhattan. That's the obvious place for a car to come and run you over. All right, he was dealt with. There's a real problem with these labor Zionists. They will kill you. And he was one of, of millions. That's the whole problem. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes from his book. Just so you understand, there were some escapees, a few from Auschwitz. One was Dr. Rudolf Verba. He ended up on the British Medical Research Council. Here's a quote from him. All right. A small group of quislings. That's putting labor Zionists. All right. I'm sorry, I'm interjecting. Knew what was happening to their brethren in Hitler's gas chambers and bought their own lives. for the price of silence. One of them was Dr. Kastner, leader of the council, which spoke for all the Jews in Hungary. While I was prisoner number 44070 at Auschwitz, I compiled careful statistics on the exterminations. I took these terrible statistics with me when I escaped in 1944, and I was able to give the Hungarian Zionist leaders 3 weeks' notice that there was a plan to send all Hungarian Jews to the gas chambers. Kastner went to Eichmann and told him, I know what you're up to, and I'll keep quiet. But a few of my friends don't want to be amongst the gas chambers victims. So if you don't mind, quote, Eichmann not only agreed, but dressed Kastner up in an SS uniform and took him to Belsen to trace some of his friends. Now, if you think the sordid bargaining ended here, here's a quote from the great book Perfidy by Ben Hecht. Kastner paid Eichmann several $1,000s. With this little fortune, Eichmann was able to buy his way to freedom when Germany collapsed and to set himself up in the Argentina. In short, labor Zionism and the labor Zionist movement were friends with the leaders of the Nazis. Now, in the case of Hungary, they could have saved the Jews. They made a point that not one religious Jew survived, not a one. Not a one. That wasn't in their agenda. And in fact, I provided a few quotes to prove they didn't want to save even one religious Jew, and they let them go.
Yeah.
They saved...
They want to make a secular state is what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
Look, I'm not going into this. They want to make a labor Zionist state which is not secular. They have their own, just like the Nazis believed in German purity and in Far Eastern occultism. They have their own wacko religion. It's called Sabbateanism, and I'm not going through it.
We've done another program. So in other words, they want only Sabbatean Jews in a new state. Labor
Zionists. They wanted people to work on kibbutzim and grow olives.
Right.
They wanted pioneers.
Right.
Now, what I'm explaining to you, to a Zionist, he might know what I'm talking about.
Right.
In those days, a pioneer, again, you were dancing the hora and singing Hatikva. That was what you saved. Look, I've got the quotes. There are a few religious who survived the Holocaust, a very few. They gave testimony that the shlichim, envoys from Jerusalem, from the Aliyah Committee, arrived in Bucharest with large sums of money to transfer hundreds of pioneers to Palestine. Mm-hmm. We asked for our members to be included and were rudely rejected. They threw out any religious... They couldn't come to their Palestine. They viewed them as animals. Now imagine Kastner in Belsen watching every day, let's say 2,000-3,000 of his people being gassed to death. Imagine that. And not objecting. He found a few friends, they left. He didn't object. It was a power trip to him. He could see how many Jews he could kill. In the end, 800,000. What the heck?
That psychology is pretty strange, but when you've explained in other programs, when people go back and get your book on Shabtai Tzvi, it makes sense, though, doesn't it?
You know what? It's a harder sell. How do I put this? when I had a friend, his name was Rabbi Marvin Antelman. He phoned me every week. We had these long conversations. He would always interject Shabtai Tzvi, Sabbateanism, and I didn't believe him for 20 years. All right. There's your answer. It's not so easy. It's not so easy.
It's not easy. Yeah, exactly. Which is why we're giving a platform here to...
It's not in our mentality.
Right.
To murderers, it's natural.
Yeah.
Labor Zionism was based on murder. Now, why did the Sephardim why did they come to Israel in the first place? Why did the leaders of the Arab world provide airplanes, let them land to take them out and form the new army? There were all kinds of questions. But the fact is, this Shimon Peres, who became president of Israel twice and prime minister, and he murdered Rabin, and he is he was the head of the Atomic Energy Commission of Israel during the 50s when the Sephardim were brought. Their children were taken from their parents. In the case of the Yemenites, they were just shipped to America, but 500 adopted. The rest died in nuclear experiments. Remember, in the early 50s, it wasn't so long ago, no one knew anything about atomic energy. They needed guinea pigs. So what Peres offered in exchange for the bomb, we'll give you a whole race to experiment on. Every Sephardic child, every single one of them, 115,000, were taken from the classroom. The Ashkenazi kids were allowed to be saved. I guess they suffered enough in Europe. No, actually, they were allowed to be saved because this was one race. They were brought, their heads were shaved and they were marked off and they were blasted with massive doses. I hear these are not X-rays anymore. They're gamma rays. They were so high.
Yeah.
You're talking about a whole race of people who were not viewed as people. These were Jews who were deciding these are not people. Now, it turns out the Yemenites, they didn't speak Hebrew, so they were viewed as animals. They didn't speak Hebrew, but they're very sophisticated. And
we'll be back in just a moment, Barry. Stay right there and keep that thought. And we're retracing history. This article I have posted up as well. You can go to lulu.com and just put in Chamish, Chamish, and you'll search all of Barry's books that are very important to watch. This article will be posted up, and of course, because he references Wikipedia, it's pretty hard to argue against what you're saying, Barry. And you mentioned, of course...
I did this on purpose to simplify it. Look, if I didn't use Wikipedia and Life magazine and all that, it's Chamish the conspiracy nut. All right? This is not Chamish the conspiracy nut. This is a terrible, god-awful history, and we have to face it. Now, what you said on the break, I'll just tell you right now that the Irgun were the Cherut. Without diving into it, the present leadership of Israel threw out labor. They don't want them. Now, what you've got, in theory, are the right-wing Cherut Irgun in power. Now, remember something. They were not just attacked by the labor Zionists. They were slaughtered. They were hanged. They were sent to Africa, to British camps. And these were by the labor Zionists. Look, Rabin tried to sink a boat that Menachem Begin was on. He tried to murder. I'm just going to say right now that these people had a disgraceful history of democracy vis-a-vis anyone who opposed them. The right wing were the good guys. They didn't have, and no matter how this history is being rewritten, they didn't have the murder that labor Zionists had. They didn't view, every Jew at least was vitally important to them. They were good guys. Right. Now, whatever they're doing in Israel right now, is way better than what labor Zionism would be doing if they were in power. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The nightmare is impossible to get out of, that I see. On the other hand, on the other side, it's not so good either. But I'm not going to dive into the whole mess. The fact is that in 1937, Eichmann came to Palestine and became very, very friendly with what call them the elite, the new Jew, the pioneer who is out in the fields planting things. This, instead of being, lawyers or doctors or professionals, they were now farmers. This was going to be the new Jew. And he was having a heck of a time. And when the Jews of Hungary were under his command, in the last days of the war, labor Zionism sent their boy, Rudolf Kastner, to Hungary just a few years later to see his pal, Eichmann. Eichmann said, take the Jews. I just want to get out of here. I need a bunch of trucks. He said, no. But a few of my friends I'd like to live, if you don't mind. He let 800,000 Jews get slaughtered. He went to Belsen in an SS uniform, and he saved a few of his friends. And before his eyes, he watched his people getting slaughtered by the thousands. Now, try and figure that out.
Yeah. Now, do you have time, do you think, to tie it to any current events or anything you think are important right now?
Look, I'm going to make a statement that I believe is accurate. The worst thing that ever happened to Israel, to Jews, is Israel, but not for the reasons people think. As for Arabs, they have their own baloney to sort out, and it doesn't matter. I'm not even diving into that. I'm saying without labor Zionism, there would have been a fight to save the Jews of the world. With labor Zionism, it was a hand-in-hand conspiracy to murder what turned out to be about 6 million of our people, knowing they were going to die. They wanted a few to be saved and the rest wiped out, and everyone else hopefully would be their political allies. When the war ended, they just rounded up the right wing and they fought them, and they had them hanged, and they had them sent to British camps in Africa. What you're saying is they had no respect for them as people. They didn't view... These were, unfortunately, I hate saying this, and it's not being overly dramatic. We had Nazis in our ranks. Right. And these were the labor Zionism.
Is there any relevance to current events that you can draw out today? I don't know.
Well, anything is relevant if you push and pull and squeeze and whatever else. But
right now, for example, we have America, in a sense, under Obama, abandoning Israel. We have the growth of nuclear weapons, which the agreement, there's a number of Republicans and Democrats very concerned about this, because Israel will be the number one.
It's about.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, is there anything that you may want to make a comment about any other events that I think are going on that would... Because there's other, I call bad agreements being made that are putting the state of Israel and Jews...
Minor stuff. It doesn't matter. We lost our people. Almost all but 100,000 were wiped out in Europe, and all of the Sephardic children were guinea pigs in the 50s. It was a nightmare. Israel was a nightmare for the Jews in every respect, and it continues to be that way. And many of the attitudes of the Jews are based on the wrong interpretation of the nightmare.
Right.
Frankly, I don't sleep well. It's terrible. I can't escape from knowing too much.
It's pretty hard to top what happened already, but I'm concerned that the current bad, if you want to call it,
all right, so we lose 6 million more. All right, so we have a second Holocaust. Maybe that's being arranged. it wouldn't shock me. Only this time I have children in direct line. Look.
Well, it seems to me like, I'll just make this quick statement. It seems to me that the policy of the United Nations and Obama is to make sure that nuclear weapons are proliferated among extreme literalist Muslim countries like Iran that want to nuke Israel, and Israel will have to use the Samson option against all the Muslim nations. The people in Israel...
That's not the way I read it, okay?
Well, I'm just telling you my analysis, okay? I know you read it differently, but let me finish. What I see happening is the state of Israel is incredibly in danger now, and our policies in America are making it worse with ISIS and ISIL and with Iran. Our policies are, in a sense, setting up the conditions to create another Holocaust, is what I'm saying.
I don't view Israel as surviving for much longer.
Well, you said that to me for years, and I took your words and actually went back and analyzed this, and my gosh, Barry's telling the truth. I see the state of Israel as being set up, is what I'm saying.
Bill, you've known me a long time. We've met. Right. You know that I never, ever open my mouth if I don't have the facts to back it.
Right.
You know that, don't you?
Right.
I've never said Rabin was murdered. He was murdered by Shimon Peres. I proved it.
Right.
All right. And that's why I'm in America right now. I proved it too well.
Yeah, in fact, they tried to kill you a number of times inside the state of Israel, so you still have family there.
I have my children there. My Lord. I have my sister there. Yes. I miss it. Look, my first country is Israel, and my family lives in Israel. And I look at the past history. Do I see trouble around the corner from the past history? You betcha.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. I can't draw out all exactly what's going to happen, but it all looks very bad. Especially when we go over the past history, I see another giant setup happening, is what I'm saying.
All I can say is we have a history where Ben-Gurion was great and Golda Meir was sweet, and they rewrote these monsters to be nice.
Yeah, didn't they?
Yep, they sure did.
But you unwrote them. How's that, Barry? With documentation. So get Barry's books at lulu.com. Just use the search engine at the top with Chamish, C-H-A-M-I-S-H. Thank you for coming on the program, Barry. Everybody once in a while needs some truth serum, and to hear from an Israeli Jewish journalist who will tell the truth in a time of tyranny is a radical thing. I appreciate what you're doing, Barry.
If there's a way to get to me, I have the article for anyone who wants to. Just write chamishba at gmail.com. I'll send you the article. Chamishba, like Barry, at gmail.com, and I'll send it to you.
Thank you, Barry, and shalom. Everybody out there, pray for the peace of Israel, for as Israel goes, so does the world. Back